Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Rifda Hanun. I'm from Go Study Global Education, and I will be your Master of Ceremony as well as moderator for today's session. We are very pleased to have all of you here with us today, and we hope that you guys can enjoy this insightful discussion. Before we begin, I would like to remind for all the participants, we kindly ask everyone to keep your microphones mute throughout the session so we can maintain a smooth discussion. And we also appreciate if you can open your camera and use the virtual background that have been sent by my colleague in the chat box so that we can have more lively discussion. If you guys have any comments or questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the Zoom chat as we will have a Q&A session after Dr. Aminath, our speaker, finish the session today. And now let us begin our session. As you guys can see in the screen, our topic for discussion today is um, why pay for performance fails in public service, and we'll be discussing about the merit pay paradox, why performance related pay fails in public service delivery. Actually, I see that the topic is very interesting because performance related pay is often introduced with the expectation that linking financial rewards to performance will encourage employees to perform even better. And then, sorry, wait, to perform better. However, as today's presentation explore, its impact in the public sector can be much more complex than how it should be. And we will be looking at the theoretical foundations behind pay for performance, the empirical evidence surrounding its effectiveness, and some of the institutional and motivational challenges that can influence its outcomes in public service. Have joined with us today the speaker, Dr. Aminath Suda. She's coming from the Maldives National University Maldives. Before I introduce her to all of you here, I would love to. So the International Perspective Series webinar is a series of international and online knowledge lectures jointly led by the CMIOTED, China ASEAN Technical Education Cooperation, or CATEP, and co-hosted by the Southeast Asia Youth Sustainable Development Foundation, or PASITA, and Go Study Global Education. The program is expected to invite 1 until 2 school faculty members to give webinars each month, aiming to enhance and enrich the growth of knowledge and broaden the horizons of learners in Southeast Asian region by inviting experts from different countries and fields to provide high quality and universalizable online lectures that will help all the learners here to acquire specialized knowledge through knowledge sharing and cross-cultural understanding. And if you guys, we have weekly webinar. So if you guys are interested to join our webinar, please make sure to follow our Instagram at pasita.education to acquire information. Without further ado, I would love to introduce our lovely speaker, our beautiful speaker, Dr. Aminath Suda. Can you say hi to the audience, please? Okay, Dr. Aminath Suda is, you can see guys here in your screen. She is the assistant professor and head of department at business and marketing of MNU Business School at the Maldives National University. We usually heard Maldives is a beautiful country with beautiful beaches, so I think we can learn from her too about that. And then she received a Doctor of Philosophy or PhD in Business and Management and Science at the University Malaysia, at Management and Science University Malaysia on 2024. And she has over 14 years of experience in higher education with expertise in business, economics, management, public policy, governments, and international development. So I believe um, we can learn so much from her today. And she also published research on public service motivation, job performance, transformational leadership, organizational commitment, and public sector management in international academic journals. As for her professional fields are business and management, public policy and governance, human resources and organizational management, entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership. Without further ado, I would like to call Dr. Aminath. You may start your screen sharing now and start the session.
Are you able to see my screen?
It's still loading.
Yeah, how about now?
Yeah. Can you do full screen, ma'am?
Yeah, it's on
Okay.
full screen now. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, loud and clear. And you have 70 minutes for your presentation, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon to all of you. A very warm welcome from the Maldives. So today I'm going to talk about the merit pay paradox, why performance-related pay fails in public service delivery. So as mentioned by the moderator, she has said that we are going to talk about the theoretical constraints, institutional barriers, and empirical evidence. I will try to make it more more interesting for you. I know afternoon is not a very good time to have a session like this, but I hope that I can impart some knowledge from myself. So what is actually PRP? I'm not going to go into a detailed discussion of what is PRP, but I felt it's important that we start with knowing what is PRP. So when we talk about PRP, what I'm trying to say is that we are moving away from a traditional model, especially in the public sector, initially where you were paid for grade or seniority. So instead of that, now we are trying to say that your salary will be contingent on measured performance. It can be either a one-time bonus or a permanent increment or a step up in pay. So the key here is what we measure, whether it is attendance. I mean, the key here is what we measure. So it's input, showing up for work, and finishing output tasks or actual services. For example, let's say you are able to see more patients. Okay, so why? Okay, why do we need PRP in the public sector? What is the theoretical foundation for it? So economically, it's about the principal agent theory. Because when you are trying to align workers' effort with organization mission, especially when we can't watch them every second, that is the reason why we want to have the PRP. And psychologically, it is expectancy and reinforcement. We want to create a very clear path, as the moderator has introduced. If I work harder, I perform better. If I perform better, I get that bonus. And there is also this sorting logic performance because they know that they can hit the target. Is it a panacea? Okay, does it work everywhere? Now, what we observe in the PRP system is that it doesn't actually work very well in everywhere or in all types of job. So it's not actually that there are issues in the public sector, but sometimes in the private sector also it may not work. So in specific jobs, for example, let's say in production jobs where you perform simpler repetitive tasks, when your output is highly observable, for example, let's say you in manufacturing or even in municipal service like garbage collection, then it works well. And also in craft jobs, this is where the internal work process is not actually seen, but the outcomes are very stable and similar, and it is quantifiable. So for example, let's say if you're working in the revenue department, if you can show that you are able to collect more revenue, then the PRP system has actually worked. So for instance, in Brazil, they were able to observe a 75% increase in fines per inspection after they introduced the PRP system. And we also see a similar evidence in the healthcare system because it has improved child immunization rate in countries like Rwanda and India. And even in teaching jobs, which is also considered more of a craft job, they were able to reduce absenteeism and they were able to improve test score, particularly in developing countries like India. But I would like to caution here, it is very difficult to implement PRP in corporate jobs. Okay, now these are jobs which we see mostly in general administration where you are not able to evaluate the outcomes. So what happens is research shows that it is largely negative because it is very hard to measure, and most of the time public sector employees, they try to game because they want to know what is being measured. Now, in recent years, we have seen a huge increase, or let's say an explosion of research in this field, especially how the PRP system is being adopted and how it is implemented. And initially, we observed that most of the research was actually undertaken in OECD countries, especially North America and Europe. But now we are seeing that the research is also undertaken in some of the African countries like Rwanda and Zambia, and also in countries like China, Pakistan, and also Korea. So here I wanted to identify one thing. Okay, what explains the huge trend towards the PRP? Because the fact is that if you look at almost all the earlier research, there's no clear evidence to show that the performance related pay system is going to work. Okay, but still people are doing it. Why? And it is mainly because of what we call as two things. One is mimetic isomorphism, and the other one is cohesive isomorphism. So what happens in mimetic isomorphism is that it's the assumption, okay, it worked in the private sector, it is also going to work in the public sector. And we don't even want to check this, whether it is going to work or not. It's a good management practices in the private sector, because we always see the private sector being more efficient. So it must be a good management practice in the public sector as well. And this was clearly seen in USA when the system was adopted in 1978. Now, one of the co-founding officers of the Office of Personnel Management, Scotty Campbell, stated, he said, there was no need to experiment prior to implementing because he simply perceived it worked fine in the private sector. So it's going to work fine in the public sector. So we blindly followed. And sometimes, especially for developing countries, there's cohesive isomorphism, especially because there are external factors which actually forces the government to implement private sector management practices. One is because of political accountability. Politicians, they are often or often made accountable by bureaucrats because the public sector is inefficient. So they are forced. And also we have the external stakeholders. For example, the World Bank and IMF will come and always say, come on, you have to do this. And it's very common in the developing countries because, we don't have much of a stake or much of a stake that, okay, perhaps this may not work. And if you look in the historical context, initially when it began, it's because of the 1970 fiscal crisis that especially that we were able to see in USA. And because of that fiscal crisis, there was a lot of pressure to make the public sector more efficient, because the public sector is very inefficient and there was this fiscal burden. So this gave to the birth of what we called as the new public management doctrine, where we are introducing business-like approaches because we want to consider this as a panacea for stimulating accountability and professionalism. So this actually created a fundamental shift in employment contracts from implicit, which was based on seniority and role, to explicit, based on verifiable objectives. So we are trying to create public servants, who are going to become more economical, that is found in the private sector. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail of some of the literature, the empirical findings. Just wanted to share as some of the findings here. What is the result? So I just wanted to present here. Perhaps I'm sure we will not have so much time because I have so much to say to go in detail of each of these studies. But just to share you the trend, in two specific sectors where this PRP is very successful is mostly in the healthcare and education, from what I have observed, especially because of the nature of job the craft job they have in the healthcare and education. They were able to observe the immunization rate. They were able to see an increase in the test score in countries like UK and also in some of the developing countries. But where it is not successful is the general civil service, which it doesn't show. Okay? Even in the context of the Maldives, which I have done my research on. So the question is, okay, now I want to actually move from to a very critical part of our discussion, the 3 pillars of friction. So when we ask why performance-related pay often fails in the public sector, the question is it because of a technical error in design? No, it is not because of a technical error in design. It is because PRP actually runs headlong along in 3 deep-seated reality. One is institutional constraints that is observed in the public sector. And the other one is the structural realities and the motivational crash. Now, I would like to spend a little bit more time on explaining each of these. Now, if you look into the institutional constraint, the environment, the governance gap. So unlike private firms that rely on pay secrecy to make incentive work, public agencies, they face with a transparency constraint. So every pay decision is subject to pay media, public and media scrutiny. So which means there is subjective appraisals that can quickly be labeled as political favoritism or bias. For example, my pay is not a secret. Everyone knows what is my pay. Okay. But if I was actually working in a private job and I would know what my colleague would be earning. So that's the difference. And there's also the stewardship constraint, okay, because we are spending taxpayers' money. So there is intense pressure to contain cost. We have to reduce the cost. Anyone in the public sector knows this. So it's very impractical to actually give large bonuses. So if you actually want to make an impact to make PRP work, you cannot give just 1 or 2% increase. It has to be at least 10 to 15% increment. Otherwise, it's not going to, make sense. And in the context of Maldives, I also found that there was lack of horizontal coordination, especially when National Pay Commission structured the salaries. They didn't have adequate consultation with Civil Service Commission. That was the body that was actually looking after all the civil service employees that we had. So this led to a lot of operational errors and also widening pay disparities that created a lot of resentment. Then we also have the structural realities, the type of the jobs that I have discussed earlier, because the standard theory actually assumes that the jobs are going to be production of craft job, more input, more output, right? Okay, but most of the public sector jobs are coping jobs. That means it is multifaceted, it's ambiguous, and the production process is not observable. You cannot easily observe it. So what happens when we introduce matrices on complex jobs like this? It actually creates a gaming behavior. Okay, so if you are a teacher, you want to show that your students are getting very high on the test result. Okay, how you do that, we don't know. Okay, and we are also not focusing on the learning environment. We are also not focusing on creating a better content, but only the test score. So we are actually neglecting the unobservable quality of public values. Okay, and there's also the collaboration gap, because most of the time the public sector jobs, they have to work in team. You cannot work in isolation. You have to work with another department, you have to call another ministry. So how are you actually, going to implement a system like this? And in my research, I also found that there is autonomy gap. Despite civil servants being highly motivated, okay, civil servants scored very low on autonomy, which is 3.5 out of 5. So they were actually trapped in red tape and bureaucracy, because political appointees were actually overseeing career staff, and this was actually neutralizing effective leadership. And these political appointees always keep on changing. And finally, perhaps the most damaging pillar, in my opinion, is the motivational crash. And it is driven by the crowding out effect. Because when you introduce a reward into a certain group of people who are intrinsically motivated, in this case, who has a high level of public service motivation, that actually brought them there in the first place. So if you ask some people, okay, why are you here? Okay, it's more than money. Okay, so Dr. Beller's research on nurses shows there was a pro-social paradox, because when rewards were made visible, they actually started decreasing their performance because they were afraid that they will look greedy for their colleagues. So this actually leads to a moral disengagement. So the employees started switching off their ethics to maximize utility at the expense of public interest. Okay. So, now we talked about the three frictions: the institutional, structural, and the motivation, right? So if you want to redesign the work environment, okay, what is going to be the future policy? So to understand what is going to be the future policy, first we have to revisit what I have mentioned earlier, mimetic isomorphism. That is, when we said that if it works in the private sector, it is going to work in the public sector. Okay, so here we are trying to ignore a fundamental difference with the institutional characteristics within these two sectors, the private and the public sector. And I would focus on three things here. One is transparency, budget, and stewardship. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in the private sector, you can keep the pay secret. Okay, why it is important to keep the pay secret? Because you don't want people to get jealous, have friction. Okay, because let's say I'm a friend of mine doing the same work, same job, same grade. If I know she is getting better than me, it is going to create resentment, right? And this is in the private sector, because most of the time they don't know what each other is getting. It's actually between the organization and the employee. So, but in public sector, we need strict transparency. Okay, why? Because we have to safeguard the democratic trust. We cannot keep pay secret. And this actually creates a kind of subjective managerial judgment, okay, which magnifies inconsistency. Okay, and the next one is budget. Okay, so in large organizations, what happens is once they have their profit, they announce the bonuses that they are going to pay. Okay, so it's very clear, because you are able to increase the pay because you are able to earn more revenue. Okay, now consider this with the public sector. We are always on the budget constraint, and we are always saying that the first thing that we have to cut is the payroll cost. All right, so we don't have this kind of a revenue stream. So if you want theories like expectancy and reinforcement to work, we need at least 10 or 15% increase in salary, which is not going to have. Okay, and then there is also the problem with stewardship. Okay, because in private sector, the owners, they decide how much surplus to distribute, right? So they have a meeting, the board decide, okay, this is going to be the bonus that we are going to share. We are going to share this much bonus. We are going to share this much profit. Okay, but if you look at the public sector, they are subject to external expectation because of the taxpayer resources. So even when public servant earns a large compensation package strictly by the rules, there is a huge backlash and outrage. Okay? So that's one of the reasons governments have these salary caps, because of that. So for example, in the Maldives, the finance ministry says that your salary should not, your overtime should not be more than 10% of the basic salary. It's because of this. It's because of the wage bills that directly contradict with the private sector logic, where you have unlimited reward for unlimited effort. So in the public sector, you're not going to get unlimited reward for unlimited effort. So that is the reality. So I would say that until we acknowledge that public service delivery operates under completely different logic than the private marketplace, our the incentive scheme that we are going to have, it's going to fail at every level. Okay. Now, okay, where does it actually work? Or are there any countries it has actually worked? Yes. Okay, so to understand why some countries performance-related pay has worked, we have to look at the institutional slate. And I'm going to draw on transaction cost economies to find that PRP is often not a technical flow, but a flow of credible trust and commitment. So for incentive to work, employees must believe that the rule of games will not change. It will not be arbitrary. Okay, so if for example, let's say if I say I'm going to give you an increase in pay, after 6 months, I cannot say, sorry, I don't have money. All right. So, but these beliefs entirely depend on the relationship between two very important people in this system. Okay, who are these two peoples? Or I would like to call them as the variables. One is the politician, and the other one is the mandarins. Okay, let me talk about these two systems separately. So if you look into the politicians, who are the politicians? Okay, these are the de facto owners. They are the ones who actually benefit from the residual, that is improved service delivery or political outcomes generated by productive workforce, right? Okay, but as I mentioned, they have a time inconsistency problem. They promise us higher bonuses today, but when the time to pay the that bonus, they have to divert those funds to other political priorities, or because of the cost containment, I'm not able to pay. So what happens is they subvert the system to serve short-term political ends. And now you have the mandarins here, the mandarins, okay? Who are the mandarins or the managers? These are the people who are there to implement the PRP system. So these are senior civil servants or management secretariats who handle their day-to-day appraisal and the distribution of the pay. So they function, they are acting as a medicine content between these politicians and the civil servant. Okay, so they safeguard the psychological contract with the employees, ensuring that the hard work is actually rewarded. Now you have this area which actually creates the friction. Okay, what is the friction? The friction is there when the political career, or let's say the career of these two people collapse, come together. Okay, how does this happen? Okay, in many administrations, the career of senior mandarins depend on the politicians, or they are the political appointees. So their future promotion, they actually rely on supporting political wishes. So when the interest is integrated like this, employees don't trust the system anymore, because they know that even if they work hard according to these mandarins, at the end of the day, they may not get paid, or they may not get the higher pay. Okay. And we also see this in the Maldives, because we have a dual authority structure where we have political appointees who actually oversee the career of civil servant. And this creates a multi-principal problem where the loyalty of the manager is divided. The loyalty of these managers are divided, leading to a trust deficit among workforce. Now look at the path below, the down here. You can see there is a clear separation between politicians and mandarins. They don't have this integrated career path, right? So this is where in countries where it was successful, for example, UK, Korea, and Sweden, okay? And here, managers, because of this separation, they actually value their reputation, okay? And they have credible commitment, which means that they don't have to depend on these politicians for their career path. So the takeaway is very simple. No amount of better matrices can actually fix the PRP system if the institutional slate is flawed. So if the manager career is tied to politician, the system will create procedural injustice and employee demotivation. And this will transform the separation. To transform this, we need to actually separate the interest of variables to ensure that the managers can provide credible commitment necessary for high performance service delivery. Otherwise, if the system is like this, then there is no trust in the system. All right. Okay, next, moving on. So we always hear the phrase, what gets measured gets managed, right? What gets measured gets managed. And this is the strength in the private sector. because they are able to measure, they are able to manage, they are able to pay. But public sector, there is a visibility trap. Okay, why a visibility trap? Because there are two things here. One is the actual public values. That is not what we are trying to measure, but what we have to measure. Okay, what are these actual public values? Creating a long-term pro-social impact. Okay, high-level team collaboration and complex problem solving. And on the other hand, okay, most of these unobservable, and because of this PRP system, we are forced to introduce a matrix where we are trying to measure. Okay, and when we're trying to measure what happened, okay, this is what happens when we are trying to measure. We are trying to make employees focus on, for example, getting things done quickly or simply ticking off checkboxes. I did this, I did that, right? And this is done, okay? And what is the ultimate problem? The ultimate problem is actually what we call as a multitasking problem based on the work of Holmstone and Milgram. Because when your objectives are to be structurally ambiguous, it actually causes employees to reduce their effort only on task on measurable output. And the result is very natural, okay? Public sector employees actually introduce gaming behavior. So if you are a teacher, very important, the test score. Rather than making the students learn better, the deep learning, because this is what I can show. I can show that, okay, they are getting very good grades, okay? Or in healthcare, where you are trying to focus on certain cases because it's easy and you can meet the target volume, and you are neglecting more complex needs. So when financial motives become the center of stage, it doesn't actually add motivation. Okay, we expect it to add motivation, but it actually reallocates it. So employees, they start prioritizing their utility. Okay, how much bonus I'm going to get over employees' true mission. And this is what exactly I observed in the context of the Maldives, because I found that the Maldivian civil servants, they scored very highly on two dimensions of public service motivation: compassion and self-sacrifice. And they were highly altruistic. So these are actual public values that involves unobservable emotional labor. So if we force the workers into a rigid system of ticking checkboxes for a small bonus, we are risking a motivational crash where their civic identity is replaced by a transactional mindset. And we have to ask the question, is this what we want? Okay. So with the introduction of the PRP system, we are seeing a shift in the psychological contract that was previously there. We are witnessing a watershed in public administration, a fundamental rewrite in the psychological contract between the state and its workers. So traditionally, we operated in an implicit remuneration system. Okay, they were paid to represent the institution, okay, and to stay loyal to the institution. And it was equity based, where seniority and grade provided predictability and protected you from political wins. The traditional model relied on obligation based intrinsic motivation. So the assumption was that you work hard because it's your duty to safeguard the community, to protect the people, rather than chasing a bonus. Okay, so it is intrinsic motivation. Okay, but now we have the explicit remuneration. What are we doing? Okay, we are suddenly making the relationship more transactional. You are no longer paid for who you are or what you hold, but for the specific verified output. So in the efficiency-based model, you become a rational agent. You only respond to reward or sanction, okay? So this creates a kind of moral disengagement because it's becoming more transactional. So instead of thinking citizen rights, you are thinking of how to game the checklist that I have talked about, and you are actually sacrificing the public values. So we have this bad news effect, okay? Because most of the time the employees feel that they are being controlled. Okay, why? Because they are being penalized, for example, when they are absent from the work. Okay, and this actually destroys the trust they have on the institution, and this is very bad. And I would say the lesson is that explicit pay isn't just a management tool, it's a cultural shift. When you bring an explicit say, you might be thinking it's a management tool, but it's a cultural shift. We are replacing the traditional ethos of duty with a model of pure economic utility, and we risk doing away with public service values without ever finding anything adequate to replace them. Now we have discussed the PRP Act as a frictional engine, and when there is a strategic when the design when a system is designed for a different setting, so we are actually borrowing a system that was designed for private sector, right? And we have forced that into the public sector without even checking whether this actually meets the institutional prerequisites. And this results in what I call as the satisfaction collapse. And it comes from two things. One is concerted control and the stress, and the other one is perceived inequity, and it is further worsened by chronic underfunding. So why concerted control? Okay, because there is a lot of peer pressure for you to do more, for you to do better, especially because, for example, like if you introduce a bonus or a group bonus, something like that, your colleagues will start policing you as well. Okay, your colleagues will ask you to do things, and this is actually not good in the long run, because it can lead to a kind of fatigue, high level of stress, because one another is policing another, right? And there's also this perceived inequity because of ambiguity, and because of the material judgment. Employees do not trust the performance appraisal system. We might be thinking that the employees will believe that the performance appraisal system is based on merit, but most of the time, in the research that I have seen, they consider it to be arbitrary and politically driven. And as mentioned earlier, because of chronic underfunding, they don't trust the system. So there is a fall in job satisfaction, and also there is a fundamental breakdown in trust in management. And I would say it's not when you have this kind of ill-fitted frictional engine, because like you are getting a car and you are putting an engine, this is not suitable for this car. So that is what is going to happen here. Okay, so the cost is not just a fiscal, it is the loss of our most valuable asset, that is the trust and motivation of our public servants. It is lost because of this. And why? Okay, why? Because of the category error, I would say. Okay, so I would say why PRP fail in the government. I would say we have to address what I call as the category error, because as I mentioned earlier, you are putting a model which is designed for private marketplace, you are trying to apply in the public sector. Okay, because we are now saying that this is the public sector. They are we are saying that they are homo economics, the people who are working in the public sector, they are economic men, okay, and they are self-interested rational being who can only work if there is reward and sanction, okay. And we are also saying that if we want more effort, we have to increase the price. That is what we are saying. But the reality is this. Okay, what is the reality? The reality is that public sector employees, they are not the economic men. They are actually driven by their public service ethos or public service motivation. And they are not here because, you know, they are not here to earn a lot of money. What makes them happy is the job they do. Okay, why am I here? Okay, why am I here? So the answer to this question is because I find satisfaction in what I do, in the impact that I create. And if you give money to me, okay, if you try to, measure that and give more money for more, then it is going to create a crowding out effect. Okay, so what happens is instead of adding to motivation, this external reward will replace self-determination with an external control. So instead of being the work, instead of finding this work more interesting, I would feel like just I'm another hired hand rather than a public servant. Okay, so this can lead a pro-social paradox. When you are making reward visible, it actually decreases your effort because your fear of being greedy, as I mentioned earlier. So I would say high performance public servants require moving beyond the transactional mindset from homo economics and designing a system that supports rather than control the public service motivation and that brings the people to this sector in the first place. Now, in the research that I have conducted, that is on the effectiveness of financial reward on job performance, there were two things that I noticed. There were two path of motivation that I noticed. First one is it was statistically significant, but it has a direct negative effect. And why the direct negative effect is because of the crowding out factor. Okay, because most of the civil servants, as I mentioned earlier, they were very high on compassion and self-sacrifice. So because of that, they feel that they feel that they are just another hired hand instead of feeling, okay, I'm doing something truly great. But the news is not that bad when I looked at, because it also created a positive indirect effect. So while it didn't have a positive, while it had a negative effect on job performance, it had a positive indirect effect through organizational commitment, especially when their pay package included housing, healthcare, and living requirement that actually gives them the signal that they were serving organizational values. So the employees become more committed to the organization. Now, to understand more on the complexity of this pay, I think it's very important for us to look at one of the landmark study that was conducted by Nicola Bella, because this is an experimental research. Now, he studied 300 nurses in Italy who were assembling surgical kits on a humanitarian mission. So that's what he was studying. And this task was, if you look at what they were doing, the task was highly pro-social impact. So the nurses knew that these kids were going to actually save the lives of those people who are in a war zone. So Bella actually found out something very interesting. In a standard fixed pay environment, when performance was visible on a bulletin board, the performance actually improved. Okay, but the moment the PRP was introduced, the benefit of transparency vanished, and this created the visibility trap. So what I'm trying to say here is this experiment actually proves that if you want to make the PRP more effective, it had to be kept a secret. Okay, because the nurses, they were worried about being seen as greedy, because who wants to think that if you are saving a life for another 25-cent bonus. So to protect the social image, the nurses subconsciously actually pull back the effort. And the next thing that actually this research revealed is what is known as the beneficiary product. So what happens is Bella actually allowed the nurses to meet the survivors who were actually saved by these kits. So when they were on a flat salary, meaning when it was not linked to PRP, and when they were allowed to meet the survivors, okay, this actually caused an increase in their performance, and it was a massive motivator for them. But when the PRP was introduced, okay, it actually resulted in drop in their performance. So the more you remind a worker of the human impact of their work, the more the financial incentive feels like a transactional insult. The extrinsic reward actually crowd out the intrinsic joy of helping another human being. So this is what happened. Okay. So Bella's work actually proves that The activities of the pro-social impact, the context and framing are everything. So if we treat the public sector employees like another factory worker, we sacrifice the motivation that makes them a public sector employees, the pro-social impact that they want to create. Okay, here just to show the time inconsistency problem that I highlighted earlier. So for example, step 1, the politician promises a performance bonus, okay? And then the employee must choose 2 things. Either the employee should work hard, okay, because they trust, and if they do that, the politician is tempted to renege and cut the bonus. Then if this happens, next time they're not going to work hard, and it creates a minimum trust, and the result is there is a mistrust in the system. So this is actually the problem. So instead of doing more work, they try to achieve what is known as the Pareto optimality, where they want to get the minimum out of it. Okay, they do not trust the system, so they respond with the minimum effort because they believe the whole system is actually politicized. So what I want to emphasize again is better matrices cannot fix a broken institutional slate. Now, this is based on one of the important research that was undertaken by Dahlstrom and Laporte in 2021, where he looked at 25 OECD countries. And this is to emphasize on the separation of Mandarin and the politicians that I have highlighted earlier. So his research actually shows that if the career paths were integrated, then managers, there is 61% of probability that the pay and performance will not work at all. Okay, but if it is separated, then it's going to be successful. So I would like to highlight here on specifically 2 countries, Korea and Japan, because both of these countries actually share a very similar Confucian tradition, and they have faced very similar economic crisis. Okay, but if you look into Korea, their civil service is strictly administrative and non-partisan, leading to a very highly developed PRP system. But if you look in the case of Japan, they have strong integration of career, and that is the result why the PRP system is non-existent in the case of Korea. So this is what I wanted to highlight here. So I wanted to touch more on the case of the Maldives, where we actually introduced a pay harmonization, and it didn't, I wouldn't say it was very successful. Okay, you can see here the government allocated 13.9 million budget to create a pay harmonization system. And it didn't actually work very well in the Maldives. Of course, we have achieved something, but it's not very successful. Okay, and why it actually failed? It failed for 3 reasons. Okay, one is the macro reason, because the trust was broken, and the other one is meso. Okay, another one is micro. Okay, so I would like to focus on these things. Okay. So at the macro level, I see a failure in the institutional slate, okay, because of the time inconsistency, because politicians, they make grand promise because of the public support. And however, even in the case of Maldives, they were faced with this stewardship constraint. There was a lot of external pressure from institutions like IMF, so it was not really possible. And at certain level, what happened was certain sectors were prioritized. For example, teachers and healthcare were prioritized. And so this actually kind of broke the trust most of the civil servants were having on the government, and that resulted in failure. Now, at meso level, the failure is a diagnostic of institutional fragmentation, because there is complete of breakdown of trust and coordination between National Pay Commission and the Civil Service Commission. The National Pay Commission actually developed a new framework, but as I mentioned earlier, they didn't have adequate consultation with the strategic the Civil Service Commission, because this is the main body who is responsible for managing the civil servants. So because of this, there was a failure. And at a micro level, there was a transactional shift because of implicit remuneration being introduced. Okay. So how do we actually address this? What can we do, to correct the system? Okay. Until we repair all three levels, that means macro and micro and also meso, just adding more money will not heal the fracture. It will still reinforce a transactional mindset. Okay, so we have to analyze the friction that caused the traditional performance-related pay system to fail. Okay, one is, instead of perfecting the matrix, we have to redesign the architecture itself. So the first thing is, I would say, create visibility based on the reward type. Okay, because we can't make everything visible. Okay, so so for example, let's say monetary rewards, we are saying it is best, work best when it is kept a secret. Okay, so if we are giving bonuses, or if we are actually providing an increase in pay, it doesn't have to be so visible. Okay, because if it's visible, it's not going to work. And the other thing is, we can also introduce symbolic reward like certificate or recognition, which can be made highly visible. Okay, because then it will actually decline the motivation. Pillar 2 is we have to frame reward as a support, but not as a transaction. So second, we must fundamentally change the framing of financial reward. We have to stop treating public service employees like a piece rate factory worker. So we must have a framework that actually supports rather than control the employees in the public sector. Because if you try to control them through the pay mechanism, then it's like you are bribing them for specific output, and this actually creates takes away the loyalty towards the organization. Okay, and the final is the most important thing, in my opinion, is actually a very strict separation of interest. Because at the moment, we have this Mandarin state where there is integrated career path of the politicians and the Mandarins in the civil service. So as Dahlstrom and the Curti Global Data proves, no incentive system is going to work until if there is a clear separation of interest. So if the careers of managers, the senior civil servants are integrated with the political owners, or we have political employees, okay, it will create a distrust in the appraisal system, because then the rules will be changed. So for any reward architecture to function, managers who run the pay system must have independent administrative status. So that is what I would like to advise here. Now, so for the pay harmonization, 500 million was allocated as a corrective phase designed to complete the pay harmonization of civil service from 2022 to 2023. The objective was about a pay rise. About a pay rise. It's also about repairing the macro trust. That was the real reason why pay harmonization was introduced. Okay, but when the state prioritized specific sectors, as I mentioned earlier, it actually created the trust problem. So the National Pay Commission actually must stop, working in isolation. Instead, they must still work in more consultation with the Civil Service Commission and others to create a framework that can move from this kind of system, because now the Civil Service Commission actually feels like they are just to issue cheats, just to hire people rather than a strategic trade partner. And as I've highlighted in my research, if you have direct financial rewards, it can have significantly negative impact on performance because it feels more transactional. So we must frame the 500 million as an organizational support to meet the requirements and the values that can work in a positive way. And we need to actually close the autonomy gap, because I observe that most of the civil servant feels they don't have autonomy. So it means that if work is not properly delegated, money without autonomy only creates reviving engines with locked brakes. So we must revise job description to ensure that employees are completing a whole work rather than, just fragmented pieces. And we also must acknowledge that the stewardship constraint that the government will face, because like if you put a 10% cap over overtime, or if you're saying that I'm not going to give overtime, then the extra effort is not going to come. And as a part of the rollout, we must integrate public service motivation screening in future recruitment to ensure that the workforce remain calibrated towards civic duty rather than purely, maximizing reward. Okay. Then this is what I wanted to highlight. So I think if you want to create a public service motivation framework, the first thing is we have to look into this. Are political and manager career strictly separated? If it is no, then we have to rely on fixed pay and implicit remuneration and avoid subjective politicized appraisal. If it is yes, if there is a clear separation, then the task measurable. Then the next question we have to ask, is the task measurable without compromising unobservable public values? Is the task measurable? Okay, if it is no, then we have to use symbolic reward, leadership, and recognition. So if it is yes, does the task have a high direct pro-social impact, the beneficiary contact that I was talking with regard to balance work? So if that is the case, if there is a high pro-social impact, because different work is different, right? So we have to ensure pay secrecy to protect the image of the PRP. So if we are not doing that, then it's not going to work. So I'm here. Okay, so first thing I want to say is that public service is actually a very fragile ecosystem. It is built on 3 pillars. Okay, one is trust, the other one is public service ethos, and the other one is organizational commitment. So when you talk about ethos, we have to understand that civil servants are motivated by implicit remuneration. Okay, they are knights. Okay, I always advocate like they are knights. Okay, to protect the paid to represent the institution and to protect the community. Okay, they are not there because of their self-interest. Okay, and the next thing about trust, the ecosystem survives on institutional sled. If there's no clear separation of interest between politicians and managers, the rule of the game loses all credibility. Okay, if there's no separation, it will lose all credibility. And pay only works when it is an indirect signal. It shouldn't be a bribe for performance. Yeah, but as a sign that the organization support the workers' life, housing, healthcare, daycare, and this is only the pathway that true leaders truly leads superior job performance. And when we focus only on price and checklist, the ecosystem defense mechanism is there. How does it works? There is motivation crowding out effect. Explicit reward replaces internal duty with an external control. There is moral disengagement. Employees switch off their ethics to avoid cognitive dissonance, and they try to involve in cherry picking activities. That means things that can give them more bonuses, things that are highly visible, rather than and they neglect the agency's true mission. And there's also a visibility trap, because it forces, for example, nurses and teachers, those people, who have this high public pro-social impact, to make them work less, because they don't want to be seen as greedy. Okay, I don't want somebody to think that I'm here because I'm getting a lot of money. That's not the reason for me to be here, in my opinion, as an educator. So if you are a nurse, if you are a doctor, or if you are, let's say, in the defense, okay, is that the reason why you are there? So because of this visibility threat. And the other thing is we have to protect the dignity of the work. This is the path to evaluation. To evaluate the public sector performance, we must stop asking how much to pay and start asking how to protect the dignity of the work, which is not there. So dignity through autonomy. We must close this autonomy gap. In the Maldives, autonomy is our lowest scoring characteristics. You cannot have dignity without discretion to solve complex problems for citizens. You need to believe that these employees are actually capable of making this decision. Okay, and we must frame the 500 million harmonization as organizational support. It should be rewarded for the identity of being a civil servant, not just a piece of, ticking the box. And the new mandate for reform, the triple failure of past macro broken political trust, meso the institutional fragmentation, micro transactional shift, it can be repaired in my opinion, but it requires us to change our matrices of success. We don't need better design of bonuses. We need better design of institutions. This is a failure of design of institution. So let's move away from the vending machine model. Let's build public service that honors the intrinsic compassion and self-sacrifice that brought our people in the work in the first place. So I will conclude by saying motivation in the public sector is not motivating in the public sector is not a vending machine where coins equal effort. It's a fragile ecosystem of trust, public service, ethos, and organizational commitment. To evaluate public sector performance, we must stop asking how much to pay and start asking how to protect the dignity of work. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Amina Sudah. For presentation. Please allow me to stop your screen share and I will be. Okay. Dr. Amina, so I found the discussion is very interesting because at first glance, the performance related pay seems like a very straightforward concept. Like if we reward better performance, we would expect people to perform better. But as you explain, especially in the public sector, the relationships between the financial incentives and performance are much more complicated than what we think it is. And I also found that discussion on intrinsic motivation and the crowding out effect,
Out effect.
particularly interesting. Like it really makes me think that about whether introducing financial rewards can sometimes change the way employees perceive their work and their motivation to serve the public. And I'm sure all the participants here have gained a deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding performance-related pay in the public sector, particularly the challenge related to performance measurement, institutional factors, and employee motivation. And we will now move to our Q&A session. I would like to call our participants who want to ask direct. If you guys have any question, our speaker, Dr. Aminat, please you can send it to the chat box here, and I will read them. Or if you want to ask directly to our speaker, you can click on the raise hand, and I will give you the permission to open mic. But okay, I have seen
I
a
think
few.
it's a question already written by Johanna.
Yeah.
Am I correctly pronouncing Johanna? So, Rohana has this question: how can organization recognize high-performing employees high without making other employees that the system is unfair? So, first question I would like to answer. Okay. The question is why, the first thing I want to talk about is why, the employees feel the system is unfair, okay? actually because of is the institutional slat that I have mentioned earlier. That is number one reason, because when there is no clear separation of interest between the politicians and the mandarins, then it becomes very subjective. Okay, because the mandarins or the managers who are responsible for implementing the system, they don't have to actually follow the order of the politician. They should have some kind of autonomy in what they are capable of doing, and they should have a way to, implement the PRP system effectively. But what happens in most of the time is that even though they want to do it, they are not able to do because they have to, get the, approval, or they have to rely on what the politicians are saying. And the other thing is sometimes we have the political appointees, they're also not the civil service employees. So this is something that actually creates a system unfair. And because of this, the trust is broken. Because now, when you go and work in an organization, it's not the physical contract that you have. You also have a psychological contract with the organization. So in your mind, you are having a contract. So you are saying, okay, this you have certain expectation from the organization. This is how it's going to happen. But when it actually works against the expectation, the psychological contract is broken. The system becomes unfair. So I would say the first thing is, if you don't address the problem of the injustice in the system itself, it's never going to be fair. Okay. Then the other thing is, without making other employees feel the system is unfair. Okay. So in a way, if you want to make the other employees feel that the system is unfair, the first thing is we have to, have this a very credible system. Then the next thing is, I think the employees pay, it is not something, the increments, the bonuses you get, the pay itself, it should not be actually publicly available. So if, I know even if you measure performance very accurately, and then, for example, let's say one of my colleague, I know this person actually work very well, work very hard, and she deserves. And still, the moment I know she is getting a higher pay, I will feel it's unfair for me. So I think the pay secrecy is very important. I hope that I answered that question. Then, could financial recognition sometimes create stronger motivation than monetary rewards in public service? Yes, it can. Okay. And this was seen in the beneficiary paradox that was introduced by Bella. She was saying, like, when they were able to meet the people of the war survivors because of the surgical kits the nurses created, they felt very happy. Okay. Of course, it's not actually a kind of recognition, but then knowing that it happened. So yes, I've also stated this in my, towards the end of the presentation. If you want to address, okay, you can create some rewards that is highly visible, which is not financial reward. Okay, so this is not finance. So recognition, certificate, letting other people know. For example, let's say quite often I see in the social media, this policeman did this, he took a baby because there was no taxi, and he carried the baby to the hospital, and there was no taxi, but this policeman went and he became heroic. Okay, so this is the kind of recognition, because you touches the emotional values that I cannot believe that it can be touched with the financial reward. So yes, recognition can be there. I hope I have answered your question. So that was one of the question I got. I have a lot of questions here.
Okay, so ma'am. So for Johanna's question, the second one, so we need to touch like the emotional part so that the non-financial recognition can be seen as a better option. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. And this is the next question. Let me read it for you, ma'am. So this is from Muhammad Ahmad. How public policy integrated to education of English language teaching?
All right. So I think when we talk about public policy integration, it's not just teaching English, in my opinion. It's actually when we want to integrate the PRB system, the question is, okay, what are we going to measure? That is very important. How are we going to measure it? And then comes with linking pay for performance. So for example, let's say in the English language or any other subject, okay, are we going to say that the teachers who are able to have a higher percentage, higher pass percentage, they are going to get an increment? Let's say, oh, the last 2 years, the teachers who were able to had a higher increase in pass percentage, are they going to increment? Just give me a minute, my laptop, and the charge is going. Just 1 second. Okay, so in that case, can it work like that? Yes, in some countries where they were able to implement a system like that, especially in the UK, I want to highlight, and also in USA, and also in some of the developing countries, India also, we have seen this. They were able to actually, increase the test score because of the implementation of PRB system effectively. But there is additional problem here, as I mentioned earlier. To a certain extent, it can actually create a problem where you just focus on, getting the higher marks.
Mm.
So we want the students, to get a very high grade in English language. But the question that we should also be asking ourselves, does the high grade actually reflects the student understanding of the English language? Now, what if we actually have a system where, for example, let's say we will increase the pay for those teachers who are able to improve the students' writing capability. Okay, because this was a student who performed previously, language writing very poor, speaking ability very poor, and they are coming from a very unprivileged, a very, how to say, in a very rural area, and now they're able to speak better. So if we have a system like that, then yes, so we can do that. But you have to answer this question, okay? What are you trying to measure? Okay, so that actually makes a huge difference rather than, just a test score or anything. So I think we have to look into the outcome that we are trying to achieve when we want to implement, when we want to integrate this policy in a particular sector. We need to know what is the outcome that we are going to achieve. So that's what I was saying. The values in the public sector, the outcome is more broader, more complex than rather than narrowing it down to something very specific. So I hope I answered your question.
Okay, so Muhammad, I hope that answered your question. And Dr. Aminat, the next question will be from Melody. She asked two questions. I will read the first one. Could setting too many performance targets actually reduce employees' ability to focus on their core responsibilities?
Okay, let me read. Could setting too many performance targets actually reduce employees' ability to focus on their core responsibility? Yes. Okay. The first thing I want to understand is why you have too many targets. Okay. Now, in public sector, why you have too many targets is because your job is very complex. It's a corporate job. So you can't just have one or two target because like when I joined the civil service initially, I was going through and it was a huge list. And then there was also like any other work that was assigned to me. So when your job description is very, complex like this, and you also have an additional statement that say any other job that is assigned to me, how are you going to measure this? Okay, so yes, I agree with you. That is the very right what you have said, because you have too many things, and this also happens in the public sector, especially in the developing countries, because we also have staff shortages, and then there are not enough people with educated skill. Then you do have too many targets, right? So I agree with that, yeah, because it has to be very clear, it has to be very specific, because the more clear, more specific, more measurable this is going to work. And the next one is, would increasing transparency in how performance is evaluated and rewards are distributed help address some of the problems with PRP? Now, that's a little bit difficult for me to agree with you. Okay, yes, transparency, I think we have to have transparency in the way the performance is evaluated. It has to be a very transparent system. Okay, so to make the system again very transparent, it has to be very clear, measurable, objective. For example, my task and your task should be very same, right? If your task is little bit different from my task, we both cannot have same kind of measurement. So it has to be very same. Okay. But regarding the distribution, I a little bit disagree because this is based on the evidence and the research. PRP system has largely worked, especially in the private sector, because one other person doesn't know the increment is there. Or let's say they know the increment is there, but how much? Okay, what is the bonus they are getting? So I might get, for example, let's say I might get a 50,000 rupiah bonus MBR. You might get 100,000 MBR bonus. The moment I know that you got 100,000 and I got 50,000, even if you worked hard, this is what I said, you will still not believe it because we are very subjective. Okay, and this can have a very detrimental effect on the work that you do because this should not be there. So in that sense, based on the evidence, I would say I'm not able to agree that the way rewards are distributed, especially how much you are being given, even if it's a bonus or a step increment, it should be publicly available. I hope that I answered your question.
I see. Okay, thank you, Dr. Aminat. And then the next question coming from Shafira. She asked two questions again. Why do you think governments continue to adopt public PRP despite so much evidence showing limited or negative effects?
Okay.
That's her first question.
This is a very interesting question, and this also what I found in one of the recent systematic reviews. The same question the author was asking when the evidence is against. I think if we are able to go through the context is very important when we talk about the evidence is whether it is negative or positive, and the way how the research is conducted, because the methodology is very important in my opinion, because a lot of studies, it is either observational studies or it is cross-sectional studies are mostly done. And also we see, very few experimental results and sometimes where it is done. So to a certain extent, whether it is negative, it's difficult for me to agree because there are studies to show that it is positive also. Of course, largely negative. So especially in the health and the education sector, I have shared with you earlier, and also in the revenue administration, in many countries, it is showing that it is having a positive effect because, the revenue collection or the fines are very much observable outputs, right? So, and it actually incentivizes, them to collect more revenue or to identify people who are not paying taxes. Even taxes is very clearly shown. Now, I also understand why the tax authorities, why they earn more pay, because their output is more measurable. So, to a certain extent, there is this belief, that this is what I said, the smorphorism belief, because still in the private sector, it is working. Still, we want to make it more efficient. So the fiscal constraint was seen in the 1970s in the developed countries, especially in USA. But now we are seeing a similar fiscal constraint in the developing countries. So now all the OECD countries, 80% of the OECD countries, they have implemented, and they are actually kind of, forcing the developing countries through their different reform agendas and asking them. And also sometimes the politicians, the government, they have to become answerable to the public. So the public is also kind of, creating this pressure that it has to be implemented. So this kind of pressure is actually, I would say, leading to implementing a PRP system, because it's actually forcing away from thinking of what is right. Because this is very clear. I can say it works here. So even still the evidence is against, I still kind of have a feeling, okay, this is going to work, so I'm going to do this.
Okay.
Then the next
Okay.
question
This
is,
question,
I think we have two more questions from, are there specific characteristics of Molly that make them unique? I don't think that is actually limited to only Maldivian public sector. I think the public sector in general is unique. That is what I've said, because I believe that the public sector employees is not driven, anyone who actually joins with the public service, because there are research to show that people with higher intrinsic motivation, especially public service motivation, they are more likely to join the public sector. So I think those people who actually join the public sector, whether it's Maldives or any other country, for me, it's difficult to believe it's because they want to earn a lot of money. So this is a defining characteristics in my opinion. For example, okay, why do you want to, go and work in the army? Why do you want to become a doctor or a nurse? Okay, why did I choose this profession as an educator? Okay, can I not go and work in a private institution or a private college? What is stopping me from doing it? Okay, it's my belief, it's what I want to do, it's what I want to achieve. Being a public university, we are able to reach more students, uplift their life, and that is important for me. And I am a firm believer in that. And I think, and not just I think, there are a lot of research to actually back this evidence. So it's not just that only in the Maldives, in other countries also. Of course, there are two schools of thought. Some people who disregard this idea. Okay, so I can only speak based on the research evidence I have. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Amina. I think we still have time for the next question. This is from Ranalinda Amaro. Wait, let me send it to you. So, thank you, Dr. Amina, for the insightful presentation. Since you discussed the Maldives experience with pay harmonization and the challenge of trust, political influence, and the shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation, I would like to ask, how can the lessons from Maldives can be applied to Philippine public sector, where changes in political leadership, performance-based incentive, and perception of fairness in government compensation can also affect public servants' motivation and trust? What aspect of the Maldives reward architecture could Philippines realistically adopt or adapt? Thank you.
Okay, it's a very long question. Okay, let me try to. How can the lesson from the Maldives be applied to the Philippines, where changes in political, performance and perception of fairness can also affect compensation, can also what aspect? Okay. There were two things that I noticed when we talked about pay harmonization. The first thing is, when you talk about pay harmonization, I think now if you look independently. And if you look at the Civil Service Commission, they have this mandate of managing all the civil service employees. So that means recruitment, selection, performance, and everything comes under them. Then you had the National Pay Commission that came because they were given the mandate of harmonizing the pay because the pay of public sector were different. So I think it's the right question to ask, should the National Pay Commission have this mandate? Because for me, the institution that was supposed to be managing the civil service is the Civil Service Commission. They have been doing this all these years. And then you have the National Pay Commission coming into picture. So, of course, the government would had some kind of a rationale, which I'm not able to understand why the National Pay Commission was there, probably to make it better and fair. So that is one thing that I noticed. And the second thing is, when increase in pay was implemented, it was implemented in like phases. Like first could be teachers, then it could be the health sector, then came the university, then came the civil service. So it didn't go actually hand in hand together. So at different stages in different time period, different pay systems were implemented. So this actually created a room for comparison also, and so much discussions, So so that was the second thing that I observed. And I would also say in the pay harmonization system, I think it was difficult to identify the different types of jobs that we have seen in the typology that I was showing you, and how the pay systems of that was there for me. So a little bit difficult, challenging for me, to answer this. But I think if we literally introduce another pay commission to create pay harmonization, because I don't understand how this Philippine system works. If you have a body that actually manages and governs civil service, they should actually do that. And there shouldn't be implemented in separate phases, pay harmonization. It should actually go together to all the public sector employees. And one of the reasons why we were not able to do that, it's because of the fiscal deficit. It's because of the budget constraint, because we didn't have enough money to do that. Because if you want to harmonize pay and increase pay, you also need money, right? So that was also one of the challenges that we faced. I hope I'm able to
Okay,
answer
so
your question.
Lynn, I hope that answered your question. And maybe we can have one more question. Maybe I will ask it to you, ma'am. So
Yeah.
you, before we have gained the information about what should another country, adapt or this theory to their countries, but what lessons from other countries could Maldives realistically adapt when designing its public sector award system, in your opinion?
Maldives design. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if I were to answer that question, I think we have seen countries where PRP system have actually worked, where the institutional, the separation of interest between the politicians and the mandarins, where there is a clear, separation. For example, let's say in the case of Korea, or even in the case of USA. So I think it's a model that we can actually adopt, and for that we need a lot of courage, because at the moment what we have is a lot of political appointees. So it's unless we have the courage to decide that we are not going to have the political appointees to oversee the civil servants' job, and unless we believe that our civil servants are capable of doing their work, where we don't need additional recruitment within the ministries or other institutions, I don't think it's going to work. So that's my final thought on this.
Well, okay, okay, okay. Thank you, Dr. Amina, for your answer. Perhaps we can hear maybe a last remark from you for the participants, as we don't have any questions left here. Ma'am, could you please share your final thoughts or maybe closing remark?
My final thoughts, right? I think this is what I've said in the last, final quoting statement. I think that is how I would like to close the statement, because I think it's very important that we respect, that we give a dignified work to the civil servants, and we also give them the autonomy. And we also move away from the idea that, we can control, we can make them work, because we are not in a factory setting. We are also trying to create knowledge workers, and knowledge workers work differently. And in my opinion, we cannot actually equate, effort with the reward. That we have to move away. And so I would say, let me conclude saying the final statement, same thing that I have said: motivation in the public sector is not a vending machine where coins equal effort. It's a fragile ecosystem of trust, public service, ethos, and organizational commitment. To evaluate the public sector performance, we must stop asking how much to pay, because this is exactly the question that we have always: how much to pay? And we have to ask the question, how to protect the dignity of the work, because that is what actually matters to a civil servant, how dignified their work is. So that is my final say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Aminat. That's a wonderful closing remark to protect the dignity of the workers. It's beautiful, I think. Okay, so on behalf of Go Study, I would like to share our gratitude to Dr. Aminat for spending your time and joining us today, sharing your knowledge to all of us here. I believe that all the participants gain a lot today. Thank you so much, Dr. Aminat. Okay,
Thank you.
Lance. Okay. Lance, what do you want to do? We will be moving to the next session, which is group photo. Okay, maybe
So do I
pass it on.
exit or I stay here? Can I have a group photo with the participants?
Yes, of course. I will also send it to your email. Okay, I think. Please, for all the participants, please open your camera and use the virtual background that we have provided in the chat box. We'll be having a group photo together. I will wait for 30 seconds. Okay, so we can have a good group photo. Okay. Okay, I will count from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, we will take the photo now. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Please smile to the camera. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Aminat. I will share the recording and the screenshots to your email after this. Okay, thank you. And Melody, please share the attendance link here in the chat box. So guys, if you want to obtain the e-certificate for today's session, please make sure you fill in the attendance link and make sure that you write the correct emails because the e-certificate will be sent automatically to your email. And don't forget to follow our Instagram at pasita.education for more information of our upcoming webinars. Thank you and see you next time.
Berapa? 100. Banyaknya lebih.